Elena Rivera had been teaching third grade for 11 years, and she thought she'd seen everything. The lost teeth during reading time, the playground arguments over who was really it during tag, the mysterious disappearance of classroom supplies that somehow ended up in the most unexpected places. Teaching wasn't just about math and spelling anymore. It was about understanding the whole child, the whole life that walked through her classroom door every morning at 8:15. Lincoln Elementary sat between two rows of apartment buildings that had seen better days. The paint was peeling on most of them, and the parking lots were always full of cars that looked like they were holding on by sheer determination. But the neighborhood had heart. Parents showed up to school events when they could, grandmothers volunteered in the library, and the local bodega owner donated supplies every September without anyone asking. Elena knew her 23 students like she knew the lines on her own hands. There was Antonio, who couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes but could solve math problems in his head faster than she could write them on the board. There was Lily, who wrote stories about talking animals during every free moment. And there was Kevin, who always smelled like his grandmother's cooking and shared his snacks with anyone who looked hungry. Then there was Maya Chen. 8 years old, with straight black hair usually pulled into a ponytail that was starting to come loose by lunchtime. She sat in the third row, right in the middle, and if you weren't paying attention, you might forget she was there. Maya wasn't disruptive. She didn't call out answers or chat with her neighbors. She just existed quietly in that space between the window and the bookshelf, completing her work with the kind of focus most adults would envy. Elena had always noticed that about Maya. Her homework was immaculate. While other kids scribbled answers with pencils held in fists, crossing out mistakes and leaving eraser marks everywhere, Maya's papers looked like they could be framed. The margins were perfectly straight. The numbers lined up in neat columns. Every letter was formed with careful precision, like she was taking a test that would determine her entire future. But something had changed in the past few weeks. Elena couldn't put her finger on it at first. It was just a feeling. The kind teachers develop after years of watching hundreds of children grow and struggle and triumph. Maya's papers were still perfect, still turned in on time, but now they looked different. The pages were wrinkled, like they'd been shoved somewhere in a hurry. Sometimes there were small tears at the edges. Once, Elena noticed what looked like a water stain, though it hadn't rained that day, and Maya herself had changed too. She'd never been the most outgoing child, but lately she'd become almost invisible. During morning circle time, when Elena asked questions and hands shot up like eager flowers reaching for the sun, Maya's hand stayed down. Her eyes, which used to at least show interest, now seemed focused on something far away, something the rest of them couldn't see. The purple jacket bothered Elena too. It was October now and the weather was getting colder, but Maya wore the same thin jacket every single day. It was faded, with a broken zipper that Maya held closed with her hand. Even inside the classroom, where the radiator clanked and hissed and made it almost too warm, Maya kept that jacket on. She'd pull it tighter around herself, like it was armor instead of just worn-out polyester. Elena had tried to connect with her. She'd asked Maya to help pass out papers, thinking the responsibility might draw her out. She'd complimented her beautiful handwriting, hoping to see that smile that used to appear when Maya was proud of her work. But Maya just nodded politely and went back to her desk, her face showing nothing. On a Tuesday in late October, the kind of gray day where the sun never quite manages to break through the clouds, Elena collected the math homework. It was a simple worksheet on double-digit addition, the kind of practice that would cement the concepts they'd been working on all week. She walked up and down the rows, taking papers from outstretched hands, making comments about good effort and neat work. When she got to Maya's desk, the girl was sitting very still. The paper was on the corner of her desk, aligned perfectly with the edge. But Maya's hands were clasped together in her lap, and Elena noticed they were shaking. Just slightly, just enough to see if you were paying attention. And Elena was always paying attention. Maya pushed the paper forward without looking up. Her fingers released it quickly, like it was hot to the touch. Elena took it with a smile and a soft, "Thank you," but Maya didn't respond. She just stared at her empty desk, her jaw tight. That purple jacket pulled close despite the warmth of the room. Elena continued collecting papers, chatting with other students, but her mind was already on Maya's worksheet. Something wasn't right. She'd been teaching long enough to know when a child was carrying a weight too heavy for small shoulders. That evening, Elena sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold beside her. She had a stack of 23 math worksheets to grade, which usually took about an hour. She liked this quiet time, seeing how her students were progressing, figuring out who needed extra help with what concepts. Her orange cat, Oliver, was asleep on the chair next to her, purring softly. She worked through the stack alphabetically, making small check marks and writing encouraging notes in green pen. She never used red. Red felt too harsh, too much like judgment. When she got to Maya's paper, she unfolded it carefully. It had been folded into quarters, which was unusual. Most kids just stuck their homework in their folders or backpacks flat. The math problems were perfect. Every single answer was correct, and the work was shown clearly in the space provided. Maya understood double-digit addition completely. Elena smiled and was about to write excellent work. At the top, when something caught her eye, at the bottom of the page in the white space below the last problem, there were words. They were written in pencil so light that Elena had almost missed them. The letters were tiny, cramped together like they were trying to hide. Elena picked up the paper and held it closer to the lamp. 4 words. Just 4 simple words that made Elena's heart drop into her stomach and her hands start shaking just like Maya's had been. Please help me eat. Elena read them again. And again. The tea went completely cold. Oliver woke up and stretched, but Elena didn't notice. She just stared at those 4 words written in the careful handwriting of an 8-year-old girl who was too afraid or too ashamed to ask for help out loud. Elena didn't sleep much that night. She kept seeing those 4 words in her mind, written in pencil so light it was almost a whisper. Please help me eat. 4 words that contained a universe of pain, shame, and quiet desperation. She'd turned the paper over looking for more, but there was nothing. Just that single plea hidden at the bottom of a math worksheet, where a child hoped a teacher might find it, but no one else would see. By 5 in the morning, Elena gave up on sleep. She made coffee and sat at her kitchen table thinking about what to do. She couldn't just ignore this, but she also couldn't make it worse. Children and families had pride, especially when they were struggling. The wrong approach could embarrass Maya, could make her parents feel judged, could close doors instead of opening them. Elena decided to start by watching. Really watching? Not just glancing. Not just the general awareness teachers have when they're managing a classroom of 23 moving, talking, learning human beings. She would pay attention to the details she might have missed. When Maya arrived at school that morning, Elena was already at her desk, pretending to organize papers. Maya came in with a group of other children, but she wasn't talking to anyone. Her backpack hung off one shoulder and it looked almost empty, barely making an impression on her small frame. Most kids had backpacks stuffed full of books, folders, lunchboxes, water bottles, and the random treasures children collect. Maya's looked like it might have a single folder inside and nothing else. During morning announcements, while the principal's voice crackled over the intercom about the upcoming book fair and reminding everyone about picture day next week, Elena watched Maya. The girl sat at her desk with her hands folded, staring at the flag during the Pledge of Allegiance. Her purple jacket was zipped as high as it would go, despite the broken zipper, despite the warmth of the classroom. The morning lessons went normally. They worked on a science unit about animal habitats, and Maya participated when called on directly, giving correct answers in a voice barely above a whisper. But she didn't volunteer. She didn't raise her hand. She just sat there, present but somehow absent at the same time. Then came snack time at 10:30. This was when Elena started to see the truth she'd been missing for weeks, maybe longer. All around the classroom, children opened their backpacks and pulled out snacks. Crackers and cheese, apple slices in containers, granola bars, sometimes cookies or chips. The room filled with the sounds of crinkling packages and crunching and the chatter of children sharing and trading and complaining about what their parents had packed. Maya opened her backpack and pulled out her math folder. She put it on her desk and started organizing papers inside it, lining them up perfectly, smoothing out corners. She didn't look at the other children. She didn't look at their snacks. She just focused very intently on those papers like it was the most important task in the world. But Elena heard it. In a brief moment of quiet, when the classroom noise dipped for just a second, she heard Maya's stomach growl. It was loud enough that the boy sitting next to Maya glanced over. But Maya's face didn't change. She just kept organizing those papers, her jaw tight, her shoulders tense. Elena felt something break inside her chest. She walked over to her desk and opened the bottom drawer where she kept emergency supplies. She pulled out a granola bar and walked over to Maya's desk, keeping her voice casual and light. "Maya, honey, I grabbed an extra snack this morning and I'm way too full. Would you mind eating this for me? I hate to waste it." Maya looked up, and for just a second, Elena saw something flash in her eyes. Hope maybe, or relief, but then it was gone, replaced by careful politeness. "Thank you, Mrs. Rivera," she said quietly, taking the granola bar with both hands. Elena watched as Maya unwrapped it slowly, taking small bites, making it last. While other kids finished their snacks in 3 minutes and moved on, Maya was still eating that single granola bar 15 minutes later, savoring every bite like it might be her last meal. Lunch was worse. Elena didn't usually monitor the cafeteria. That was the lunch aid's job. But today she stood near the doorway watching. The cafeteria was loud and chaotic, exactly how cafeterias with 200 elementary school children always are. Kids traded items from their lunchboxes, argued over who got to sit where, spilled milk, and laughed at jokes only 8-year-olds find funny. Maya sat at the end of a long table, in that in-between space where the third graders ended and the fourth graders began. She had a lunch tray in front of her with the school lunch, chicken nuggets and green beans and a small carton of milk. But Elena had watched the lunch line carefully, and Maya hadn't gone through it. She hadn't handed over a lunch card or cash. She'd just picked up a tray that someone else had left behind, a tray with food that had already been picked at by someone else. Elena felt sick. She watched as Maya ate slowly, carefully, like someone who doesn't know when they'll eat again. When the girl thought no one was looking, she wrapped one of the chicken nuggets in a roll in a napkin and tucked them into her jacket pocket. The shame on her face was so clear it was painful to see. This wasn't a child being sneaky or mischievous. This was a child trying to survive. After lunch, while the children were at recess, Elena went to the office. She asked the secretary, Mrs. Kim, to pull up Maya's records. Sometimes the school had information about family situations, emergency contacts, notes about circumstances that might affect a child's ability to learn. The file didn't say much. Maya's father, David Chen, worked at a warehouse. Her mother, Lynn, worked as a cleaner. There was an older brother in middle school. The family lived in the Garden View Apartments, the complex about 6 blocks from school. Emergency contact was a grandmother who lived across town. Nothing in the file said anything about financial hardship or food insecurity, but Mrs. Kim, who'd worked at Lincoln Elementary for 20 years and knew every family in the district, leaned over her desk and lowered her voice. "I heard David lost his job about 2 months ago. The warehouse closed down, laid off everyone. Lynn's been trying to pick up extra shifts, but you know how it is. They make just enough that they don't qualify for assistance, but not enough to actually make it." Elena knew exactly how it was. She'd seen it dozens of times in her years of teaching. Families caught in that terrible gap where they earned too much for help but not enough to survive. Parents working multiple jobs and still not able to put enough food on the table. Children going to bed hungry, coming to school hungry, spending their entire day hungry while trying to focus on fractions and spelling words. That afternoon, during quiet reading time, Elena watched Maya again. The girl had a book open, one of the easier chapter books from the classroom library, but she wasn't really reading. Her eyes moved across the page, but Elena could tell she wasn't seeing the words. She was somewhere else, probably thinking about what she might eat when she got home, if there would be anything to eat when she got home. When the final bell rang and children grabbed their backpacks and rushed out the door, loud and excited about freedom, Maya packed up slowly. She put her folders in her backpack, zipped it carefully, and pulled on that purple jacket even though it was still warm outside. Elena wanted to say something, to do something, but she didn't know what yet. So she just smiled and said, "Have a good afternoon, Maya." Maya nodded and walked out, her backpack barely making a bump on her back, her hand holding her jacket closed where the zipper was broken. That evening, Elena made phone calls. She called the school counselor, Ms. Rodriguez, and explained the situation. She called the principal, Mr. Thompson, who listened carefully and promised to help however he could. She even called her friend who worked with a local food bank to understand what resources might be available. But mostly, Elena sat at her kitchen table with Maya's worksheet in front of her. Those 4 words glowing under the lamplight. Please help me eat. A child shouldn't have to write those words. A child shouldn't have to hide a plea for help at the bottom of math homework, hoping someone would notice but terrified of what might happen if they did. Elena knew she had to help, but she had to do it carefully with dignity, in a way that would support Maya without humiliating her or her family. Because hunger wasn't just about food. It was about pride and shame and the desperate desire to appear normal when your whole world was falling apart. She looked at those 4 words one more time, then folded the paper carefully and put it in her desk drawer. Tomorrow she would start making things better. Tomorrow she would show Maya that someone had seen her, someone had heard her silent cry for help, and someone was going to make sure she didn't have to be hungry anymore. Elena arrived at school earlier than usual the next morning. The hallways were still quiet, with just the sounds of custodians finishing their work and the coffee maker gurgling in the teacher's lounge. She had a plan, but it had to be executed perfectly. One wrong move, one moment of embarrassment, and Maya would retreat even further into herself. Worse, her family might feel judged, might pull away from any help offered. She'd spent half the night thinking about this. The easiest thing would be to call Child Protective Services, to report a child who wasn't being fed. But Elena knew that system. She'd seen it work beautifully for some families and destroy others. Maya's parents weren't neglecting her out of cruelty or indifference. They were drowning, working as hard as they could and still going under. Bringing authorities into that situation wouldn't add food to their table. It would just add fear. No, this needed to be handled differently, with care, with respect, with the kind of community support that didn't feel like charity. First, Elena met with Principal Thompson in his office before the morning bell. He was a good man, maybe 10 years from retirement, who'd grown up in this same neighborhood and understood the families they served. Elena showed him the note, explained what she'd observed, and laid out her plan. We need to be discreet, she said. Maya's already ashamed. If we make this obvious, we'll make it worse. Mr. Thompson nodded, reading the note with sad eyes. What do you need from me? Permission to keep Maya in during lunch a few times a week. I'll say I need help with classroom tasks, and I need access to the Community Resources Fund. Every school had a small fund for emergencies, for field trips when a family couldn't afford the fee, for a winter coat when a child showed up in November wearing a thin hoodie. It wasn't much, but it was something. Done, Mr. Thompson said. And I'll talk to Ms. Rodriguez about getting the family connected to the weekend food program. Quietly. Ms. Rodriguez, the school counselor, was already on board. She'd made calls the night before to community organizations, to churches with food pantries, to programs that helped families in crisis. By the time school started that morning, there was a network of support ready to activate, all of it designed to look natural, like opportunities rather than handouts. The morning passed normally. Elena taught her lessons. The children worked and played and learned. But when lunchtime approached, Elena's heart started beating faster. This was the moment. This was where she would either help Maya or accidentally make everything worse. As the other children lined up for lunch, Elena called out in her normal, cheerful voice, Maya, could you stay back for a minute? I need some help with a project. Maya looked up and Elena saw that flash of worry cross her face. But she nodded and stayed at her desk while the other children filed out, chattering about what was for lunch, who they'd sit with, whether it was pizza day or chicken nugget day. When the classroom was empty and quiet, Elena walked over to Maya's desk. The girl sat very still, her hands folded, waiting. Elena pulled a chair over and sat down next to her, keeping her voice casual and warm. Maya, I'm working on reorganizing the classroom library, and I could really use help. The thing is, it's going to take a few lunch periods to get it done. Would you be willing to stay in and help me? I was thinking we could order some sandwiches from the deli down the street so we don't have to rush to the cafeteria and back. Maya's eyes went wide. Elena could see the calculation happening behind them. The weighing of whether this was real or whether this was something else. Something that would end in embarrassment. You don't have to if you don't want to, Elena added quickly. But I'd really appreciate the help. And I hate eating alone. Okay, Maya said softly. I can help. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Perfect. What kind of sandwich do you like? 20 minutes later, they sat on the floor near the classroom library, surrounded by books that did actually need reorganizing. Between them was a bag from the deli containing 2 turkey sandwiches, 2 bags of chips, 2 cookies, and 2 bottles of juice. Elena had ordered the larger sandwiches, the kind that came with extra meat and cheese and were really too big for most people to finish in one sitting. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Elena talked about books, about which ones were most popular with the class, about how she'd organize them by reading level, but maybe it would be better to organize them by genre. Maya listened and nodded and ate her sandwich slowly, carefully like she was trying to make it last. But Elena noticed that Maya did finish it. Every bite, and the chips. And when Elena pushed the cookies toward her and said, "I really shouldn't eat both of these, would you help me out?" Maya took one with a whispered thank you that sounded like a prayer. While they worked, Elena talked. Not about hunger or money or struggles. She talked about her own childhood, about growing up in a small apartment with 4 siblings, about times when money was tight and her mother had to get creative with meals. She talked about a particularly hard year when her father was out of work, how the family had made it through with help from neighbors and her mother's stubborn determination. "You know what I learned from that time?" Elena said, shelving books while Maya handed them to her. "I learned that needing help doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. Everyone needs help sometimes. Everyone." Maya didn't respond, but Elena saw her shoulders relax just a little. The girl looked less like she might bolt at any moment, less like she was holding her breath waiting for the other shoe to drop. They spent the rest of lunch working on the library, and when the other children came back from recess, Maya actually had a little color in her cheeks. She went back to her desk with the same quiet demeanor, but something had shifted. Something small but important. Over the next week, Elena implemented the rest of her plan. She created a classroom helper rotation that included Maya and 3 other students who she suspected were also struggling, though maybe not as severely. These helpers got to stay in during lunch twice a week to help with various tasks, always with food provided, always framed as a privilege rather than charity. The other children actually started asking if they could be helpers too, which made it even more normal, even less like something that was specifically for the kids who needed it most. Ms. Rodriguez worked her magic too. She reached out to Maya's parents under the guise of a routine check-in, something she did with all families. During that conversation, she mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that there was a weekend food program at the school where families could pick up bags of groceries every Friday. No applications, no income verification, just a simple sign-up sheet. Several families used it, she explained. It was there for anyone who wanted to take advantage of it. Lin Chen, Maya's mother, had been hesitant. But when Ms. Rodriguez mentioned it was funded by community donations and that actually they needed more families to participate, so the donors would keep supporting it, she'd agreed to try it. Pride was easier to swallow when you were told you were actually helping by accepting help. Elena also worked with the school secretary to get information about local churches and community centers that offered free meals, job training programs, and other resources. This information was sent home with all families in a general newsletter, nothing targeted, nothing that would make anyone feel singled out. But the most important change happened in those quiet lunch periods in Elena's classroom. Twice a week, Maya stayed behind, and they worked on various projects while eating sandwiches and talking about nothing in particular. Elena never mentioned the note. She never asked Maya about home or food or whether things were hard. She just created a space where Maya could eat without shame, where she could be a kid helping her teacher instead of a kid who needed help. After the second week, Maya started smiling occasionally. Small smiles, barely there, but real. She started participating more in class, raising her hand sometimes, her voice a little stronger when she answered questions. The tightness around her eyes began to fade. One Friday afternoon, as Maya was packing up her things, Elena handed her a small bag. Inside were granola bars, fruit snacks, and a few other non-perishable snacks. "I cleaned out my desk and found all these," Elena said with a smile. "I keep buying snacks and forgetting I have them. Would you take them home? I feel bad wasting them, and I really don't need to be eating all this myself." Maya took the bag, clutching it to her chest. "Thank you, Mrs. Rivera." "You're welcome, sweetie." Meanwhile, the community support network was working behind the scenes. A member of the local church had reached out to businesses in the area about job openings, and one of them needed maintenance workers. Ms. Rodriguez had made sure David Chen heard about it. He applied, interviewed, and started the following Monday. Part-time, but it was something. It was a start. The weekend food program started providing bags to Maya's family every Friday. At first, Lin Chen looked embarrassed when she picked up the first bag, her eyes darting around like she was worried someone would judge her. But the volunteer who handed her the bag, a grandmother from the neighborhood, just smiled warmly and said, "Good to see you. We've got some nice stuff this week." By the third week, Lin started to relax. She realized that several families she knew were also picking up bags, that this wasn't about shame but about community taking care of its own. Elena watched all of this unfold from her position as a teacher, a position that allowed her to see the whole picture while pretending not to. She saw Maya start to thrive again. She saw the tension leave the girl's shoulders. She saw her participate in class, laugh at jokes, act like the 8-year-old child she was supposed to be instead of like someone carrying the weight of adult worries. The note stayed in Elena's desk drawer, folded carefully. She didn't need to look at it anymore. She'd read it, she'd heard it, and most importantly, she'd answered it. Not with fanfare or announcements or anything that would draw attention. She'd answered it with sandwiches and kindness and a network of support that looked like opportunity instead of charity. Because that's what Maya had needed. Not pity, not dramatic rescue. Just someone who saw her, really saw her, and cared enough to help in a way that preserved dignity while filling an empty stomach and an emptier heart. By Thanksgiving, everything had changed and nothing had changed. The classroom looked the same, with its alphabet posters and student artwork covering the walls, the same arrangement of desks in neat rows, the same morning routine of attendance and announcements. But if you knew where to look, if you paid attention to the small details, you could see that Maya Chen was different. She still sat in the third row, still wore that purple jacket sometimes. Though Elena had quietly arranged for the school's winter clothing donation to include several jackets in Maya's size that mysteriously found their way to her, Maya now had a navy blue jacket with a working zipper that she wore on the coldest days, though the purple one still made appearances. Like an old friend, she wasn't quite ready to give up. Her homework was still immaculate, still turned in on time with those perfectly straight margins. But the papers weren't wrinkled anymore. They weren't handled like secrets that needed hiding. They were just homework, the normal work of a third grader who was good at math and getting better at writing. The biggest change, though, was in Maya herself. She'd started raising her hand during lessons. Not every time, not constantly, but enough. Enough that Elena would see her arm go up during math, would call on her and would hear that small voice give the correct answer with growing confidence. Sometimes Maya even offered to read aloud during language arts, something she'd never done before October. During snack time, Maya still pulled out her backpack, but now there was actually food inside it. Crackers, fruit cups, granola bars. She ate them casually like the other children, without that desperate edge that had characterized every bite back in October. She even traded snacks sometimes, giving Antonio half her crackers in exchange for some of his grapes. The kind of normal kid transaction that Elena had worried Maya might never feel comfortable enough to participate in. The lunch situation had resolved itself naturally. Maya's father, David, had gotten the part-time maintenance job and had impressed his new employers enough that by mid-November, they'd offered him full-time work with benefits. It wasn't the warehouse salary he'd had before, but it was steady. Combined with Lynn's cleaning work, the family had stabilized. They weren't wealthy, probably never would be, but they were surviving now instead of drowning. Maya brought lunch from home most days now, usually a sandwich and some fruit, sometimes leftovers in a container. Nothing fancy but enough. More importantly, it was hers, not salvaged from someone else's tray, not eaten with that shame Elena had witnessed that first day she'd really watched. The weekend food program continued, and the Chen family still participated. But now Lin Chen volunteered sometimes too, helping pack bags for other families, turning what could have been a source of shame into a point of community connection. She'd made friends with other parents, had started attending the school's parent meetings. The family was weaving itself back into the social fabric that poverty had threatened to tear them from. Elena kept up the classroom helper rotation through the fall. It had become such a normal part of the classroom culture that kids genuinely looked forward to their turns. Maya still had her assigned lunch periods with Elena, though now it felt less like an intervention and more like a genuine friendship. They'd finished reorganizing the library and had moved on to other projects, creating a bulletin board about famous scientists, sorting and cataloging the class supply closet, making posters for the school's reading challenge. During these lunches, they talked about regular things. Maya told Elena about her older brother Thomas, who was on the middle school basketball team. She talked about her grandmother's cooking, about a book she was reading, about wanting a dog someday. They were the conversations of a child who had space in her mind for normal dreams and interests, not just the consuming worry of where the next meal would come from. One day in early December, as they sat on the floor sorting colored pencils by color and sharpness, Maya said something that made Elena's breath catch. "Mrs. Rivera, why did you help me?" Elena looked up from the pencil box in her hands. Maya was watching her with those dark eyes that had seen too much too soon, eyes that were curious now instead of haunted. Elena thought about how to answer. She could deflect, could pretend she didn't know what Maya meant. But this child deserved honesty. She deserved to know that her quiet plea had been heard. "Because you asked," Elena said simply, "and because everyone deserves help when they need it." Maya nodded slowly, processing this. "The other kids don't know, do they? That you helped me special?" "No, they don't, and they don't need to. This was between you and me." "Good." Maya went back to sorting pencils, but Elena could see a small smile on her face. Not embarrassment, not shame, just satisfaction that her dignity had been preserved, that her crisis had been addressed without becoming public spectacle. In February, during their regular lunch period, Elena collected homework as usual. She was at her desk, making notes about who needed extra help with fractions when she noticed something clipped to Maya's math worksheet. It was a small piece of paper folded once. Elena opened it carefully, her heart beating faster, worried for just a moment that there might be another plea, another cry for help. But it wasn't a cry for help. It was a drawing. The drawing showed two figures, one tall and one small, holding hands. They stood under a rainbow with a sun in the corner. The figures were simple, the kind of art that 8-year-olds make, but the care in it was obvious. Every color was inside the lines. The sun had rays that extended outward in perfect intervals. The rainbow had all the right colors in the right order. Elena turned the paper over and her eyes filled with tears. In that same careful handwriting that had once written a plea for food, Maya had written something new. "Thank you for seeing me." 6 words this time instead of 4. But these words carried hope instead of desperation. They carried gratitude instead of hunger. They carried the acknowledgement that being truly seen, being truly noticed, was sometimes the most important gift one person could give another. Elena pressed the drawing to her chest, taking a deep breath to compose herself. When she looked up, Maya was watching her from across the classroom. Their eyes met and Maya smiled. A real smile, full and genuine, the smile of a child who was going to be okay. Elena smiled back, then carefully tucked the drawing into the front of her desk drawer, right next to the folded homework with those 4 words that had started everything. 2 pieces of paper, 2 messages, marking the before and after of a child's life being transformed not by grand gestures or dramatic interventions, but by quiet noticing and gentle care. The rest of the school year passed normally. Maya continued to thrive. Her test scores improved, not because she hadn't been smart before, but because she had the mental and physical energy to focus on learning instead of survival. She made friends, tentative at first, but gradually becoming part of the social network of 3rd graders who shared snacks and played together at recess. The Chen family's situation continued to improve. David got a small raise in March. Lynn was able to cut back to 1 job instead of working double shifts. Thomas made honor roll at the middle school. They moved from crisis mode to stability, from day-to-day survival to the ability to plan for the future. But none of this happened because of one person's heroic rescue. It happened because a teacher noticed, because a community had structures in place to help, because resources existed and someone knew how to connect people to them with dignity. It happened because Maya had the courage to write 4 words at the bottom of a math worksheet, and because Elena had the wisdom to read them not just as a cry for help, but as a trust that help would come. On the last day of school, after all the students had left with their report cards and summer reading lists and hugs goodbye, Elena sat at her desk in the quiet classroom. She pulled out the 2 pieces of paper from her drawer and looked at them side by side. "Please help me eat. Thank you for seeing me." 2 messages from the same child, separated by 7 months in a universe of change. Elena folded them carefully and put them back in the drawer. She wouldn't throw them away. They were too important, too precious. They were evidence that small acts of attention and kindness could change a life. The children would ask for help if they thought someone might answer. That being seen was sometimes more important than any lesson plan or curriculum standard. Maya Chen would go on to 4th grade in the fall. She'd have new teachers, new challenges, new opportunities to grow and learn. She'd probably face difficulties again at some point because life was like that. But she'd also carry forward the knowledge that she'd been seen, that she'd asked for help and received it, that her community had caught her when she was falling. And Elena would return to her classroom in August to meet 23 new 3rd graders, each with their own stories, their own struggles, their own invisible needs. She'd look at them with the same attention she'd given Maya, watching for the signs that a child was carrying too much, looking for the silent cries for help that came in wrinkled homework and avoided eye contact and 2 empty backpacks. Because that's what teachers do. They see, they notice, they pay attention to the details that others might miss, and sometimes, if they're lucky and wise and care enough, they get to change a child's life not with grand gestures but with sandwiches and kindness and the quiet message that you matter. I see you and I'm here to help. Years passed the way they do in schools, marked by changing seasons and graduating classes and the endless cycle of September beginnings and June endings. Elena Rivera continued teaching 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary, watching hundreds of children pass through her classroom, each one leaving an imprint on her heart in ways both large and small. But she never forgot Maya Chen. The drawing and the note stayed in her desk drawer, carefully preserved in a manila folder that she'd labeled simply, "Remember." She didn't look at them every day or even every week, but they were there, a constant reminder of what teaching really meant beneath all the lesson plans and standardized tests and parent-teacher conferences. Sometimes, on difficult days when the bureaucracy felt overwhelming, or when she questioned whether she was making any difference at all, Elena would open that drawer. She'd pull out the folder and look at those 2 pieces of paper, the desperate plea written in pencil so light it was almost invisible, the drawing with its rainbow and 2 figures holding hands, the transformation captured in children's handwriting and crayon. Those papers had become her compass, her guide when she felt lost in the daily chaos of teaching. They reminded her why she'd chosen this profession in the first place. Back when she was young and idealistic and thought changing the world would be easier than it turned out to be. The truth was, teaching wasn't what most people thought it was. It wasn't just about grammar rules and multiplication tables. Those things were part of it, sure, but they were surface level. The real work was in noticing. It was in seeing the child who came to school hungry, who wore the same clothes 3 days in a row, who seemed fine on the surface but was drowning underneath. Maya had taught Elena that children in crisis rarely announced their needs. They didn't raise their hands and ask for help. They hid their struggles behind carefully maintained facades of normalcy. They suffered quietly, privately, desperately hoping someone would notice while simultaneously terrified that someone might. The note had been an act of profound bravery. 4 words whispered in pencil at the bottom of homework, where they might be seen or might be overlooked. Maya had taken a chance, had trusted enough to ask, and Elena had been paying attention enough to hear. Over the years, Elena had replicated that same careful approach with other students. She'd learned to spot the signs: the child whose backpack was too light, the one who ate lunch too quickly or never seemed to have any, the one who wore the same outfit repeatedly, and she'd learned how to help with dignity, making support look like opportunity instead of charity. Maya wasn't the only child Elena helped over the years. There was Daniel living in his family's car. There was Priya, whose parents were divorcing. There was Alex, who was being bullied. Each child brought their own pain, their own need to be noticed and cared for. But Maya remained special because she'd been the one who taught Elena how to truly see. She'd been the catalyst that transformed Elena from a good teacher into a great one, from someone who cared about education into someone who understood that education meant caring for the whole child. Elena heard updates about Maya occasionally. The middle school counselor mentioned she was making honor roll. A colleague saw her at the high school, thriving and confident, planning to go to college. The updates painted a picture of a child who'd survived a crisis and come through stronger, more resilient, more able to face whatever challenges life brought. Elena liked to imagine Maya as an adult someday, maybe becoming a teacher herself, maybe helping other children the way she'd been helped, or maybe doing something completely different, but carrying forward the knowledge that being seen and valued could change everything. On a quiet evening many years later, Elena sat at her kitchen table and pulled out the folder once more. She thought about all the children who'd passed through her classroom, all the small interventions and quiet support and moments of connection that had added up to a lifetime of teaching. She thought about what it meant to truly see another person, not just to look at them but to notice them, to pay attention to the details, to care enough to act when you saw something wrong. In a world that moved so fast, that demanded so much attention, the simple act of noticing had become revolutionary. That's what Maya had needed. Not just money or food, though those helped. She'd needed someone to see her, to read her whispered plea and respond with dignity and care. To understand that hunger wasn't just about food, but about shame and fear, and the desperate need to appear normal when everything was falling apart. Elena had given her that. She'd seen Maya, really seen her, and in doing so had helped her survive a crisis that could have damaged her forever. But Maya had given Elena something too. She'd taught her that teaching was about so much more than curriculum. She'd shown her that the most important lessons happened in moments of connection and care. She'd reminded her that every child carried an entire life with them, complete with joys and struggles that no lesson plan could address. The note had been Maya's gift to Elena, as much as Elena's response had been her gift to Maya. It had been an invitation to be fully present, to pay attention, to participate in the sacred work of helping a child navigate a difficult world. Elena placed the papers back in the folder, back in the drawer where they'd lived for so many years. Tomorrow she'd return to school and meet her new class. She'd learn their names and watch carefully for the signs that someone needed help, for the wrinkled papers and empty backpacks and averted eyes that spoke louder than words. Because that's what she did now. That's who she'd become. Not just a teacher, but a noticer. Someone who understood that beneath every academic struggle was a whole person who needed to be recognized and valued and helped. The work was exhausting sometimes. It meant carrying worries home, losing sleep over children who were suffering, accepting that she couldn't save everyone. But it also meant moments of profound transformation. It meant being present for a child's turning point, for the moment when survival became thriving, when shame became courage, when invisibility became being truly seen. Maya was somewhere out there in the world now, living a life that Elena had played a small but crucial role in preserving. She'd face difficulties again because everyone did, but she'd face them with the knowledge that people existed who would see her, who would help her, who would catch her if she fell, and Elena was still here, still teaching, still noticing, still paying attention to the children who needed her most, still looking for those hidden pleas for help, still believing that education meant caring for the whole child. The world needed more people who paid attention, more people who saw beyond the surface to the struggles underneath, more people who responded to hidden pleas with dignity and care, more people who understood that help didn't have to be dramatic to be transformative. Elena closed the drawer and stood up. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new children, new opportunities to see and help and make a difference in small but crucial ways. And somewhere, maybe another child would write a note, hide a plea, hope that someone would notice. And maybe, if they were lucky, they'd have a teacher who was paying attention, a teacher who understood that 4 words at the bottom of homework could be the most important message they'd ever receive. A teacher who would see them and help them and show them that being noticed was sometimes the first step toward being saved.